The sun rose slowly over the small rural town, painting the dusty roads in shades of gold. The morning seemed calm, but in the center of town there was already a stir. People were gathering near the open wooden platform where animals, tools, and even people were often put on display for sale. For most of the town it was a day of excitement, a chance to watch, to mock, and to gossip. But for Clara, it was the most painful day of her life. Clara stood quietly near the back, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to keep her composure. She was not like the other young women in the crowd. She was taller, her frame broader, and her presence hard to ignore. For years she had heard people whisper cruel things about her size, calling her too big or unfeminine. Instead of seeing her strength, her kindness, or her quiet determination, most of them saw only a chance to make a joke at her expense. Her relatives, who should have stood by her side, had betrayed her. They saw her not as family to be cherished, but as a burden. When the chance came to profit by sending her away, they seized it without hesitation. Clara had begged them not to do this, not to put her on that platform like she was nothing more than a thing to be bargained for. But her words meant nothing to them. Their faces were cold, their hearts closed, and their voices cruel as they reminded her that she had no choice. The crowd grew thicker as the morning stretched on. Men in rough jackets, women with sharp eyes, and children who repeated the whispers they overheard from their parents. All had come to watch. Clara felt their eyes crawling over her, as though she were no more human than the cows tethered nearby. Every glance felt like a wound, every whisper like a knife. When the auctioneer finally climbed the steps to the platform, the noise of the crowd settled into eager silence. He was a tall man with a booming voice, his words carrying across the square. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, "we have something unusual today." He looked in Clara's direction with a smile that held no kindness. "A fine young woman, strong, sturdy, and fit for work. Who will start the bidding?" Clara's knees nearly buckled. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the rest of his words. Strong, sturdy, fit for work, those were not words of respect. They were words that stripped her of humanity, words that made her feel less than who she was. She wanted to scream, to run, to hide from the sea of faces watching her, but her feet refused to move. The first voice rose from the crowd, mocking more than serious. "I'll give a loaf of bread for her." The crowd burst into laughter. Clara's cheeks burned red with shame. Another man called out, "She'd eat more than she's worth." More laughter followed, loud and cruel, echoing in her ears. Each laugh pressed her deeper into despair. She lowered her head, wishing the earth would swallow her whole. Memories of her childhood flickered in her mind. Times when she had been laughed at for being different. Times when she had cried alone in the dark, wondering why she could never be enough for anyone. The weight of all those years pressed heavily on her chest. Now, in front of the entire town, her worst fear was coming true. She was nothing more than a joke to them. The auctioneer tried to calm the crowd, though even he chuckled under his breath. "Come now, serious offers only." He pointed at Clara. "Look at her. Strong arms for the fields, a back that can carry more than most. Don't waste my time with nonsense." His words did not make her feel any better. They only reminded her of what she was to them, a tool, a worker, not a person with feelings and dreams. Finally, a man raised his hand and offered a small amount. The crowd chuckled again, whispering about how cheap she was, how no one would want her. Another man raised it by a little, more to show off than out of genuine interest. The bids were half-hearted, insulting in their low numbers. Clara could hear the whispers behind her, women commenting that no man would want a wife like her, men joking about her being too much to handle. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, though she tried to blink them away. She did not want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had always tried to hold her pain inside, to keep her dignity no matter how much they mocked her. But in that moment, as laughter rang in her ears and her own family stood off to the side with smug satisfaction, her strength began to break. The sky above seemed too bright, too cheerful for the weight she carried inside. She glanced at the horizon, at the wide fields stretching beyond the town. She longed to run into that open space, to escape the voices and the stares. But she stood frozen, trapped by fear, by betrayal, by the cruel hands of fate that had placed her here. The auctioneer clapped his hands, trying to drive up more interest. "Come now, gentlemen, you won't find another like her. Built strong, ready to work. Who will take her home today?" His grin was wide, his voice eager. But the bids were still small, the laughter still louder than the offers. Clara's heart sank further with each passing moment. She thought of her dreams, the ones she had once held as a little girl, the dream of finding love, of building a family, of being seen as someone worth cherishing. Those dreams seemed foolish now, like fragile glass shattered on the ground. She told herself she should stop hoping, stop wishing for something that could never be. Perhaps this was her fate, to be sold, to be mocked, to live without dignity. The crowd grew restless, sensing that the spectacle was more entertaining than the purchase. People leaned closer to their neighbors, whispering, pointing, laughing. Clara could feel her soul shrinking, her spirit curling inward to hide from the blows. The world seemed colder than it had ever been before, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered to her not to give up. It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise of the crowd, but it was there. A voice that told her she was more than this, that her worth was not defined by cruel words or shallow judgments. She clung to that whisper, fragile as it was, because it was all she had left. The auctioneer raised his hand again, preparing to close the bidding. Clara's heart pounded as she realized her fate was moments away from being sealed. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for whatever life awaited her after this day, not knowing that destiny was about to take an unexpected turn. The auctioneer's voice grew sharper as he tried to close the deal. But before he could slam his hand down and announce the final bid, the sound of hooves echoed down the dusty road. Heads turned as a tall figure appeared, riding a dark brown horse that moved with steady power. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat, his boots scuffed from long days on the trail, and his shirt clung to his shoulders with the weight of honest work. He was a cowboy, the kind of man people whispered about, respected by some, envied by others, and known for carrying himself with calm authority. The crowd shifted, murmurs spreading quickly. His name was Daniel, though many simply called him the Cowboy. He had built a quiet reputation across the region for being fair, fearless, and a man who never backed down from what was right. Children looked up to him, ranch hands admired him, and even those who tried to test him found themselves silenced by his steady gaze. He was not the kind of man who came to the auction often, and certainly not for spectacles like this one. His presence alone seemed to change the air. Daniel dismounted with smooth ease, dust rising from the ground as his boots landed firmly. He tied the reins to a post and began to walk toward the platform, his long strides drawing every eye in the square. People whispered his name with both curiosity and unease. Some wondered if he had come to bid. Others thought perhaps he was there on business. But when his sharp eyes lifted to Clara, still standing on the stage with her head bowed, it was clear that he had come for something else entirely. Clara felt his gaze before she dared to look. She had been staring at the ground, trying to disappear, but the weight of his attention made her lift her eyes. For a moment their gazes met. His eyes were not filled with mockery or cruelty like the others. They held something she had not seen in a long time, warmth, dignity, and a quiet fire that spoke of strength. It startled her so much that she quickly looked away, certain she must have imagined it. The auctioneer forced a laugh, trying to keep control of the situation. Well, looks like we have a new guest. Care to place a bid, Cowboy? He asked, his tone laced with both sarcasm and unease. Daniel's voice rang out steady, calm but firm enough to silence the chuckles in the crowd. What kind of men are you, he asked, that you stand here treating a woman like an object? His words cut through the air like a whip, causing the laughter to die. The crowd shifted nervously, unsure how to respond. Clara's heart gave a sudden jolt. No one had ever spoken like that for her before. She searched his face, wondering if this was another trick, another way for someone to make her the center of ridicule. But his expression did not waver. He stood tall, his eyes fixed not on the auctioneer but on her, as though she were the only person there. The auctioneer coughed, clearly uncomfortable. Now, Daniel, no need to turn this into a sermon. We're just conducting business here. Daniel's jaw tightened. He took a step closer to the platform. This isn't business, he said. This is cruelty, and it ends now. The crowd fell silent. A few men muttered under their breath, but no one dared speak loudly against him. His presence was too strong, his reputation too solid. Clara's relatives, standing off to the side, looked unsettled. They had not expected anyone to interfere, especially not Daniel. One of them sneered, whispering that he was just showing off, but even they looked uneasy. Daniel climbed the first step of the platform, his boots echoing against the wood. The auctioneer raised his hand as if to stop him, but then lowered it, uncertain. Daniel stopped beside Clara, and for the first time she felt the warmth of someone standing not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. He turned his head slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't belong here," he said softly. "You deserve better than this." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but years of cruelty made her hesitate. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why would you care?" Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her as though he were seeing not just her size or her appearance, but her very soul. "Because I can see the truth," he said. "You're not too much. You're not too little. You're just right. Just right for me, for my arms, for my world." His words were steady, not shouted, but they carried such conviction that Clara felt them sink deep into her heart. The crowd gasped, whispers flying like wind through dry grass. Some scoffed, some laughed nervously, but others were stunned into silence. No one had ever spoken of Clara like that before. Daniel reached out his hand. Clara stared at it, torn between fear and hope. If she took it, her life would change forever. If she refused, she might never have another chance. The weight of the moment pressed on her chest, but something inside her whispered to trust him. Her hand trembled as she slowly lifted it, placing it into his. His grip was firm, steady, not possessive, but protective. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was like to be held without judgment. The auctioneer sputtered, trying to regain control. "Now wait just a minute. She hasn't been properly sold." Daniel's voice rose again, sharper this time. "She's not for sale. Not now, not ever. She leaves with me." No one moved. The authority in his tone left no room for argument. Even those who wanted to protest fell silent, their courage evaporating in the face of his strength. With one smooth motion, Daniel lifted Clara down from the platform. She let out a small gasp, not from fear but from the sudden sense of freedom. The wooden boards that had felt like a prison under her feet were gone. Instead, she was in his arms, safe, steady, and supported. The crowd parted as Daniel carried her through, his head held high. Clara pressed her face against his shoulder, her heart racing. She felt both terrified and alive, her spirit torn between disbelief and hope. Behind them, whispers rose louder, some mocking, some curious, and some admiring. But Daniel did not slow. His boots struck the ground with purpose, each step carrying Clara further from the humiliation of the auction and closer to something she had never known: dignity. The horse waited patiently where he had left it. Daniel set Clara gently on her feet, keeping one steadying hand at her back. "You're safe now," he told her quietly. His voice carried no doubt, no hesitation. Clara looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion and wonder. "Why me?" she whispered again, unable to keep the question inside. Daniel gave a faint smile, the kind that lit up his weathered face. "Because the world was too blind to see what I saw in a single moment. You're not what they say you are. You're more." Clara felt tears rising again, but this time they were not from shame. They were from something she had almost forgotten: hope. Daniel helped her onto the horse, climbing up behind her with ease. With a gentle nudge of the reins, the animal moved forward, carrying them away from the crowd. Clara looked back once, seeing the stunned faces left behind, the same people who had laughed at her only moments ago. But their voices were distant now, fading into the dust. For the first time, Clara did not feel like she was running away from something. She felt like she was being carried toward a new beginning. The road stretched ahead, open and wide, and though she did not know what awaited her, she felt safer than she had ever felt in her life. Clara sat on the horse in front of Daniel, her hands gripping the saddle tightly as the animal moved steadily down the dusty road. The fairground grew smaller behind them, the sound of whispers and laughter fading into the distance. Yet even though the crowd was gone, Clara's heart continued to beat wildly. She could not believe what had just happened. A man she had never met had stepped in, lifted her from the place of her deepest shame, and carried her away as though she truly mattered. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the scent of fields and grass instead of dust and sweat. Still, she dared not relax. Her mind spun in circles, filled with questions she was afraid to ask. Why had Daniel done this? What would happen to her now? Could she trust him, or would he eventually see her the way everyone else did? Daniel's arm rested lightly near her, steadying her when the horse shifted. He said nothing at first, giving her space. His silence was not cold. It was gentle, the kind of silence that made her feel she was not being pressured. Finally, after a long stretch of road, he spoke in a low voice. "You don't need to be afraid anymore," he said. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but her past would not let go so easily. "People always say things like that at first," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of hooves. "But they change. They laugh, they mock. They leave." Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "I don't change like that. When I give my word, I keep it. I meant what I said back there. You're just right. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." The words struck her deeply. She felt her chest ache with both pain and hope. No one had ever said anything like that to her. It felt like a dream, something too good to be true. She stayed quiet, unsure if she should let herself believe it. After an hour of riding, the road led them to a stretch of open land. Wide fields spread in every direction, dotted with cattle grazing lazily. The sound of birds filled the air, and the breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. Clara had never seen so much space, so much freedom. Her life until now had been filled with small rooms, small chances, and small hopes. Here, the world felt endless. Daniel slowed the horse near a stream, helping Clara down gently. Her legs wobbled as they touched the ground, but his steady hand kept her from stumbling. He untied a pouch from the saddle and handed her a piece of bread and a flask of water. "Eat," he said simply. "You've had a hard day." Clara hesitated, then took the bread with trembling fingers. The simple act of someone thinking of her needs filled her with warmth she had not felt in years. She chewed slowly, each bite reminding her that she was no longer in the cruel square, no longer a target of laughter. Daniel sat across from her on the grass, his hat tilted back slightly, his eyes calm. He did not stare at her the way others did. He looked at her as though she were someone worth listening to, someone worth knowing. After a while he asked, "What's your name?" Clara blinked. No one had even bothered to ask her that back at the fair. "Clara?" she said softly. Daniel nodded, repeating it like he wanted to remember. "Clara, that's a strong name. Fits you well." Her lips trembled into a small smile, the first in what felt like years. She looked down quickly, hiding it, afraid to seem foolish. But Daniel noticed, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly too. They continued their journey as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. The road grew quieter, and the silence between them became easier, no longer heavy with fear. Clara found herself glancing at Daniel now and then, studying the way he held the reins, the calmness in his face, the steadiness of his presence. He looked like a man who had weathered storms but had not been hardened by them. Still, doubt gnawed at her. "Why me?" she finally asked. The question had burned in her chest since the moment he had lifted her off the stage. "You could have chosen anyone. You could have walked away. Why me?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "Because I couldn't stand by and watch what they were doing to you. No one deserves that. And because I saw you, not the way they see you, but the way you really are." Clara frowned, confused. "How could you see anything in me?" "You don't even know me." Daniel's eyes softened. "Sometimes it doesn't take long to know the truth about someone. I saw the strength in you standing there while they mocked you. I saw the pain you carried, but also the dignity you refused to let go of. That kind of strength is rare, and it matters." Clara felt tears well in her eyes. She turned her face away quickly, ashamed of crying again, but Daniel did not laugh or scold. He let her cry in silence, his presence steady beside her. As night approached, they reached a small camp Daniel had set up near his land. He built a fire with practiced hands, the flames flickering warmly against the darkening sky. Clara sat close to the fire, wrapping her arms around herself, still unsure what her place in this new world would be. Daniel placed a blanket over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. "Rest," he said. "You're safe here." Clara looked up at him, searching his face for any hint of deceit. But all she saw was honesty. She pulled the blanket tighter and whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he replied. "Just let yourself heal." The fire crackled, and for the first time in her life, Clara felt what safety might truly mean. She leaned back, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, and slowly drifted into sleep. Daniel kept watch, his gaze steady on the darkness beyond the fire. He knew the world was full of people who would try to break someone like Clara, But he also knew that as long as she was in his care, no one would lay a hand on her again. When Clara woke the next morning, the sky was painted with pink and orange. She felt rested, though still uncertain. She found Daniel already awake, tending to the fire and preparing breakfast. He handed her a piece of roasted meat and a cup of warm coffee. "Eat," he said with the same quiet care as before. Clara took it, her heart softening with every small act of kindness. She realized then that Daniel's words at the fair had not been empty. He truly meant them. He truly saw her as just right. Her fears had not vanished, but they began to loosen their grip. For the first time, Clara wondered if perhaps her life was not doomed to pain and ridicule. Perhaps there was a place for her, a life where she could be valued, respected, even loved. As she looked at Daniel, busy with his morning tasks, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. She did not yet have the courage to name it, but it was there, alive and growing. And deep inside, Clara began to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story was only beginning. The morning sun shone brightly as Daniel guided Clara toward his ranch. The journey was long, but Clara did not feel the same fear she had felt before. The wide-open skies, the rolling fields, and the quiet rhythm of the horses' hooves filled her heart with a strange sense of calm. She had never known such freedom. Her life had always been small, confined to the narrow walls of other people's judgment. Now, as the horizon stretched endlessly before her, it was as if the world itself was reminding her that there was more waiting for her than shame. When they finally reached the ranch, Clara's eyes widened. It was nothing like the cramped homes she had known. The land spread wide with strong wooden fences, pastures where cattle grazed, and stables filled with horses. There were barns, sheds, and a big farmhouse that stood proudly against the landscape. The air smelled of hay, leather, and fresh earth. Men and women worked across the land, each busy with their tasks, yet each respectful in their movements. Clara could feel the weight of something she had never truly felt before, belonging. Daniel helped her down from the horse once again, his touch steady and careful. "This is home," he said simply, motioning to the land. "You're safe here. No one will mock you or try to hurt you. You'll see." Clara's heart fluttered, but doubt clung to her still. She lowered her eyes, uncertain if she could ever fit in a place like this. People had always seen her as different, as wrong. Could she truly be accepted here? The workers on the ranch glanced at her curiously at first, but their looks were not cruel. They respected Daniel too much to show unkindness to anyone he brought. A few nodded politely, some even smiled gently, and slowly Clara realized that she was not being laughed at. No one whispered cruel words. The silence of judgment that had always haunted her was gone. Daniel introduced her quietly. "This is Clara," he said to his workers. "She'll be staying here." His tone was final, leaving no room for doubt. That simple statement carried more weight than Clara could understand. To her, it meant she was not being passed along, not being pushed aside. She had a place. The days that followed were new and strange for Clara. At first, she kept to herself, unsure of how to act. She wandered the fields quietly, staying near the farmhouse, watching others work. The ranch hands treated her kindly, though they gave her space, sensing her nervousness. Daniel never pushed her. He simply checked in on her, offering food, a warm blanket at night, and soft words of reassurance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Daniel found her standing near the corral watching the horses. She looked both curious and afraid. "Have you ever ridden before?" he asked gently. Clara shook her head. "No, I've only watched from a distance." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time to change that." He brought out a gentle mare, calm and patient. "She's easy," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "She won't hurt you." Clara hesitated, fear in her eyes. "I'm too big," she whispered. "I'll break her." Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, Clara, you're strong, but that's not a curse. Strength is a gift. This horse can carry you easily. Trust me." His voice carried such certainty that Clara found herself stepping forward. With Daniel's help, she mounted the horse, her heart racing. At first, her body tensed with fear, expecting disaster. But as the mare began to walk calmly under her, something inside Clara shifted. The horse carried her with ease, steady and sure. For the first time in her life, she felt weightless, as if the world's cruel words could not touch her here. Daniel walked beside the horse, his eyes on Clara. "See? You're just right. Always have been. Clara's lips parted in a smile she could not hold back. The wind touched her face, the sky opened above her, and for once she felt free, not just from the crowd that mocked her, but from the chains of her own doubt. Over the next days, Daniel continued to teach her small things. He showed her how to feed the horses, how to mend a fence, and how to guide cattle gently. Clara discovered a strength she had never been allowed to use before. The workers began to admire her determination. She was not afraid of hard work, and though she stumbled at first, she never gave up. Her laughter began to return, quiet and shy, but real. One evening at dinner, the ranch hands gathered around the long wooden table. Clara sat at the far end, nervous, but Daniel pulled out the chair beside him and motioned for her to sit there instead. Everyone noticed, and Clara felt her cheeks warm. For the first time, she was not hidden in the shadows. She was welcomed. As days turned into weeks, Clara's confidence grew. She learned to ride faster, to guide a horse with her own strength. She helped in the kitchen, cooked meals for the workers, and earned smiles of thanks. She even laughed freely with some of the women, realizing that not everyone looked at her with cruelty. Yet in the quiet of the night, doubts still whispered in her heart. She wondered if all of this was temporary, if one day Daniel would decide she did not belong after all. She often caught herself staring at him from a distance, watching the way he worked, the way he treated people with fairness, the way his calm presence seemed to command respect. Each time he spoke to her with kindness, her heart grew softer. But fear told her not to trust it too much. Daniel noticed her hesitation, but he did not push. He gave her time, knowing that wounds of the heart could not heal overnight. Still, he made sure she never forgot his words. Whenever he saw her doubt herself, he reminded her softly, "You're just right, Clara. Just right for this place. Just right for me." One night, a storm rolled across the land. The wind howled, rain poured, and thunder shook the ground. Clara found herself trembling in the farmhouse, memories of fear rushing back. She curled into a corner, thinking of the cruel voices from her past, the way they had left scars deeper than she had realized. Daniel found her there, her hands pressed to her ears. He knelt beside her, his voice steady against the storm. "Clara, look at me." She lifted her eyes slowly, tears mixing with the fear. "You're safe," he said firmly. "The storm will pass, but you are stronger than any storm. Don't forget that." His words wrapped around her like a shield. Slowly, her breathing steadied. For the first time, she faced a storm without drowning in fear. When the thunder faded and the rain slowed, she realized she had survived it not alone, but with someone who truly stood by her. By the next morning, the storm clouds had cleared, leaving the sky bright and blue. Clara stepped outside, the wet earth glistening under the sunlight. She breathed deeply, feeling new strength in her chest. The ranch no longer felt like a place she was borrowing. It felt like a home. And though she did not yet say it out loud, her heart knew the truth. Daniel had not just saved her from the cruelty of the auction. He was saving her from the prison of her own doubt, teaching her to see herself as she truly was. Worthy, strong, and just right. The weeks turned into months, and Clara began to feel like she was truly part of the ranch. Each morning she woke to the sound of roosters crowing, the smell of fresh hay, and the wide-open skies that welcomed her with endless possibility. Her hands grew calloused from work, but she was proud of those marks. They meant she belonged to something real. She was no longer the woman who stood trembling on a stage while cruel voices mocked her. She was someone with purpose, someone who mattered. Daniel remained constant in her life, a steady force that never wavered. He guided her when she needed help, encouraged her when she doubted herself, and gave her space when she needed to breathe. His words were few, but they were always honest. Each time he reminded her that she was just right, the walls around her heart weakened a little more. Still, Clara could not forget the cruelty she had endured. Sometimes late at night she worried that the world outside the ranch still saw her as a joke. She wondered what would happen if those same people ever saw her again. Would they laugh louder? Would they try to tear her down once more? The fear lingered like a shadow. That test came sooner than she expected. One bright afternoon, a group of travelers stopped at the ranch to trade supplies. Among them were faces Clara recognized, the very same neighbors and relatives who had betrayed her at the auction. Their eyes widened when they saw her, no longer broken and trembling, but standing tall in work clothes, her hair tied back neatly, her skin glowing with health from the sun. For a moment silence hung heavy in the air. Then the whispers began again. "Look at her," one woman sneered softly. "She's still too big even for ranch work." Another man smirked. Daniel must be desperate. Clara's heart clenched, old wounds tearing open. She wanted to shrink back to hide as she had always done. Her hands trembled slightly as the mocking voices grew louder. But then she felt Daniel's presence beside her. He had stepped forward, his tall frame casting a shadow that silenced the whispers. "Enough," Daniel said firmly, his voice carrying the same authority that had silenced the crowd at the fair. "You had your chance to value her, and you failed. Clara is not yours to mock. She is part of this ranch. She is part of my life. And if you can't see her worth, then the fault is yours, not hers." The crowd froze, stunned by the sharpness in his tone. Clara's heart pounded as his words echoed in her ears. He had not just defended her. He had declared her place by his side. One of her relatives scoffed, trying to save face. "You're blind, Daniel. She'll never be good enough." Daniel's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "She's more than good enough. She's better than any of you who tried to break her spirit. She's strong, loyal, kind, and brave. And she's mine. Not because I own her, but because I choose her, because she is just right for me." The words hung in the air like thunder, leaving no room for argument. The mockers shifted uncomfortably, their power gone. Some muttered under their breath and turned away, while others looked at Clara with new eyes, realizing perhaps for the first time that she was no longer the woman they could belittle. Clara's chest swelled with emotion. Tears blurred her vision, but this time they were not from shame. They were from pride, from love, from the overwhelming realization that she was no longer alone in her fight. Daniel had not just rescued her once. He was standing by her every day, proving her worth to the world and, most importantly, to herself. When the travelers finally left, silence returned to the ranch. Clara turned to Daniel, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why do you keep saying those things? Why do you keep fighting for me?" Daniel looked at her with the same calm steadiness he always had. "Because it's the truth, and because sometimes it takes someone else's voice to remind us of what we already are. You don't need to change, Clara. You only need to believe that you've always been enough." Clara's tears spilled freely then, but she did not hide them. She stepped forward and for the first time allowed herself to lean into him fully. Daniel's arms wrapped around her, strong and protective, exactly where he had always promised she belonged. The days that followed were brighter. Clara no longer walked with her head bowed. She greeted the workers with smiles, laughed freely at the dinner table, and rode her horse across the fields with confidence. She was no longer haunted by the whispers of the past. They had lost their power because she now carried the truth in her heart. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Daniel and Clara stood on the porch of the farmhouse watching the sky. The land stretched out before them, endless and beautiful, a symbol of the future that awaited them. Daniel turned to her, his voice quiet but certain. "Clara, I meant every word I've ever said. You're not too much, you're not too little. You're exactly what I prayed for, exactly what I need. You're just right for my arms, just right for my life." Clara's heart overflowed. She had spent her whole life believing she was not enough, that she was unworthy of love or respect. But standing there, with Daniel's steady hand holding hers in the wide-open world before her, she finally believed the truth. She was worthy. She was enough. She was loved. The ranch echoed with laughter and life. The storms of the past finally quieted. Clara knew the world beyond the ranch would always carry cruelty, but it no longer mattered. She had found her place, her dignity, and her love, and as Daniel pulled her close, his words echoing softly against the evening sky, she knew her story had only just begun, not as the woman mocked and sold, but as the woman cherished and chosen, forever just right in the arms of the man who saw her true worth.